So I'm Joanie Sanderson, and I'm a family counsellor here in BrokenHill, and I'm 70 years of age, and I've raised my 8 grown children now in BrokenHill. And my journey with the Darling River started before I was 2 years of age, and my family, we used to go up camping on the Darling River. And so from a very young age, my father taught me about the love and respect of the river. And it's just in my heart, the river. And like some of our most beautiful times were spent there, like fishing and catching yabbies, and waking up in the morning and hearing the kookaburras, and just sitting around a fire and just having that beautiful time together. So that was where, and we continued that for a long while. And then when my children came along, we used to take our children camping along the river as well. And so that's been a long journey. And my neighbours and friends, everyone would go up to the river camping. And then Kobe Hollow was started in the Menindee Lake, so people would go up with their boats and they'd be fishing and sailing, and like seeing the communities just start to grow was quite amazing. And like as a child, I used to go up, when we weren't camping on the river, I used to go up and stay in Menindee with my auntie and uncle up there. And so I've had this incredible connection all of my life. And so to see what's been happening, just watching steadily over the last few years, on a personal level, has just absolutely broken my heart. My first experience with counselling up at Wilcannia was sitting on the Darling River counselling one of my clients and thinking how, I can't get anything better than this, and sitting on the river counselling someone, that to me was just the ultimate thing, having a yarn down along by the side of the river. And I think it was last year when they had a rally up at Wilcannia, I went up there with a couple of other of my friends, and we went down into the dry riverbed, and the whole town went down there, and I have never felt grief like it ever. Like, it was just like this mass grief. And one of the heartbreaking things for me was actually seeing a boy about this high, and he had his 2 brothers next to him, and he's standing in front of this poster trying to explain to him why we were doing this rally for their darling Barker. And that left an imprint on me, because I know when the Darling River is low up there, that the rates of suicide increase, the rates of depression. There's no outlet, because the river is their blood, and that really broke my heart. I've been to other rallies down at Wentworth and up at Menindee, and still that same thing like you're experiencing, because a lot of people think, we've got a new pipeline, there's water out of a tap, but it's not about the drinking water. It's about the very lifeblood of our community. It's somewhere that we can go, that we get refreshed. Last year there was a group came. We've had so many groups that have come out here, and this group came out, and I think they were from the Murray-Darling Basin or something, and they're sitting up the front, and I asked them a question. I said, could you tell me how many of you live next to water? And every single one of them put up their hand. And I said, well, you just imagine if all that water that you see every day, if that was taken away, how would you feel? And they all went really quiet, and I'm thinking that's what it's been like for us out here. It's like, the water has been taken away. The only water we get to see is if we go to the zinc lakes or if we go to the swimming pool, And so, working as a counsellor, I've just seen people not only affected by the lack of water in the river, but also by the drought, But I remember when I went to school, we learnt that you had water, it rose and made moisture and it came down as rain. But if you've got no water in the river, everything's going to be drier. And it's just watching that steadily happening. And the last time the water came down, I think it was just before 2016, I remember we went up to the lakes, and all along the edges there were families camping, right along, and kids running around. And like when you go up there now, there's hardly any of that happening because the water's getting less and less. And I went up with a couple of friends. This is towards the end of last year. We went up for something in Menindee, and we stood on the edge of the Darling River, which had been such a life source to me as a child growing up, and it was just green and horrible. And then the next time we went up was when all the dead fish were there, and just seeing these big fish that you knew that were as old as what your parents were, and they were laying dead along the side of the river, and the stench. So just watching this is just been, it's been grief for me, but the people that are living along those rivers and depending on them for their livelihoods, it's just been heartbreaking. And so it doesn't matter where you go. And like one of the things that's really saddened me is how, because we've got an election in Sydney, it's like every person has crawled out of their hole and they've come out here like all of a sudden it's so important. But, there's been people that have been fighting and saying, and the sad thing is that we shouldn't have to be fighting for a basic human right to have clean, fresh water that flows in our waterways. And, if we don't look after our waterways, it doesn't matter how many jobs we produce or how many hospitals we build, everybody will get sick. It's like it's a basic human need that we shouldn't be having it as a political argument. It should be something that the whole of Australia fights for. And so I want people to wake up, like before it's too late. We've got to start looking up. We've got this beautiful land. We're cutting down trees. We're poisoning waterways. We're putting money before people, and it's destroying cultures. It's destroying communities. It's destroying people, everywhere. Everywhere where the water dries up affects some person or another. So that's what I want to get out there. Please, people, just wake up before it's too late, because we've got this precious land, and, God made us custodians of this land, and He expected us to look after this place, that's what He wants us to do. And if we don't do that, we're failing, the next generation and the one after that. What are we going to leave to our grandchildren? It's just so, that's kind of my story. And, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Please don't go anywhere. We've got some questions, if that's all right. Just to clarify, because just wondering, you've mentioned you've been here for so long. In your view, is this drought different to in the past? Do you see the condition of the waterways and the rivers different to previous droughts?
It is, in the respect that we had two lots of water that came down, and the first one was released down to South Australia, and the last time it was released down into South Australia, they had more than enough water. And, the statistics show that they had more than enough, and yet our lakes were still drained. And, the lakes are the breeding ground for so many fish and other reptiles and animals, and so if they had listened to the people that live along these places that have been crying out, don't take all the river, don't take all the water, because if you do, these fish are going to die. And so in that respect, it has been different, because I've been there before where different parts were dry, but never like this, because this should never have happened. And I'm not blaming people, I'm not blaming, cotton growers or anything like that. This has to be something that's happening from the top. If you're not getting enough water in, you don't let it out. It's very simple. I just don't know why it's become so complicated. And so in that respect, it has been very different, because it should never have happened. They've got to learn to listen to the Indigenous people, because they've managed this land for a lot longer than what we have. And it's like, so it's listening to them and saying, you know, what do you think we should do here? Involving them more and more in the running of the waterways and the land and the under the ground as well. So in that respect, I think it has been very different. Yeah.
We've been hearing from people that they don't think it's a drought as such, but more the management of the waterways are not sufficient to keep things alive. Do you and other people in your kind of immediate family and community, what do you think are the kind of causes of what's going on?
Well, I really think it's just been mismanagement. The more, you know, when I started coming along, you know, I've always had concerns, but I started coming along, and the more and more I started to hear, I would go home and cry because I'm thinking, these are people that should be managing our land, you know, these are people that should be making sure that communities have enough water, you know, and if we can't, you know, hearing people talk on the TV during the week where they're having to walk off their farms because the water is too expensive for them to grow their crops, the food crops that they need to grow. Like, this should not be happening. You know, there's got to be some sort of, they've got to put a full stop in and say we need to stop all taking of water from the river by agriculture until we find out and get to the bottom of this. And, you know, I know there's both sides of government that have made mistakes. Okay, if you've made a mistake, own up to it. You know, it's not a blame game. It's about saying, well, we actually did that wrong and we've got to suck it up, say that we're sorry and we've got to do something about it. That's what people want. They want them to start being honest, not covering up and making excuses and passing the buck. You know, and that's what I'm hearing from people. We want some honesty, we want some transparency so that, you know, and like when I go past the new water tower up at in Micah Street or whatever street it is, like I feel like crying because even the fact of everything that happened with the pipeline, like it should never have happened because we had enough water to supply BrokenHill. You know, all these things we've just been watching happen and people have been trying to speak up and it's like we've just been forgotten. Nobody's listening out here. And so, you know, there's so many people that feel like that. So we just want people to listen to the people that live along the river that know what's best. So...
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful. May I ask a question? You mentioned you're a counsellor, and we understand from talking to other First Nations peoples and other folks that, you know, the conditions are causing significant grief to people. But in your professional work, are you seeing like an increase in the kinds of people who are seeking help?
I am, yep. Very much so, very much so, and especially amongst the Indigenous people because it's just been awful, really. So, and you know, every time you hear about another person that's suicided, you think, you know, it's not right, you know, because people don't understand. They think, oh, if I give you a bottle of water, that's going to help. If I give you something to drink, but you know. It's like one of the other groups that came through, I lose track of which one it was, but the guy, after he'd heard all the interviews, he said, since I've been out here in BrokenHill, I've realised that it's much more than drinking water, it's actually part of people's DNA. You know, water is part of our DNA, it's part of everyone's DNA. And, you know, we've got to make sure that we do something about it, you know.
I'll just check if the others have any questions. Do you have any questions? That was your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, the public health issues. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know how hard it is, and we know lots of other folks have been to talk to people. We are very grateful for you sharing this with us, and your video material and everyone else's will be then on the website for you so that you can point people to the stories and you can say, this is what we're thinking, this is what we care about.
Yeah, and like I was going to say, like tomorrow, if people come along, you might get people that are feeling angry, but people have been trying to be heard for so long that the only way now they know how to speak out is to get angry. So, you know, if you can look past that layer of anger and just think this is because they've been speaking out so many times and not being heard, that it's just like, what's the point anymore? You know, why won't people listen? You know, and it's like a child. If you have a child that's being ignored, they'll start acting out. And so, you know, that's what it is. It's because people are wanting to be heard.
Well, if it's no consolation, but for those of us who volunteered to come here, we feel exactly the same way. We're very angry. We're very confused as to how this stuff can happen. So we are appreciative of your time. So thank you very much.